The long view.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Economic Development Project Team meeting here on this beautiful February wintry day. Love it. So we'll call this meeting to order. First on our agenda, before we get to our discussion items and updates, we have our minutes from our last meeting, which occurred on January 11th. Commissioners, have you had a chance to look at those?
Yes.
Do you have any feedback or corrections?
Nope.
All right, I will file them as they are, and that will move us to our discussion of strategy. We have 5 items before us today, and you should have a packet in front of you. So we'll start with the very first one, and this is a commercial facilities exemption for Full of Green Gold LLC. It's a project located at 3 Lexington Avenue Northwest, and we'll turn it over to Mr. Klooster to tell us about this item.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, good afternoon. This is kind of a 2-part overview here. The first thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the commercial facilities exemption program, because that's one that you have not seen.
Yeah, a while. When was it?
At least as long as I've been here, so I can't tell you.
A while.
It's at least 15 years, and then I'll talk about the project and ask the applicant to come up as well. So Commercial Facilities Exemption, Public Act 255 of 1978. 1978 is the same year the Industrial Facilities Exemption legislation was enacted, and this is essentially a companion piece of legislation for commercial property as opposed to industrial property. So it works from a tax perspective, it's identical. It functions the same way as the Industrial Facilities Exemption. From a process perspective, it's the same process that you will be familiar with: creation of a district, Commercial Facilities Exemption District, and then considering an application for the exemption. And the property and the types of projects that this program can apply to. So the property has to be, it's a little bit unique. The property has to be obsolete or vacant land that's been zoned commercial for 3 years before 1978. It can be land that's cleared or to be cleared due to a fire or blight. It can be cleared or vacant land inside of a downtown development authority, or it can be property that the city owned but sold to a private party before 1978. So a little bit unique there. And then the types of projects, this can apply to both new construction or rehabilitation. And it only applies to commercial properties and not commercial housing properties. So it has to be 100% kind of traditional commercial retail office types of projects. So that's the overview of the Commercial Facilities Exemption Program, Public Act 255 of 1978. So basically, a new program, old legislation, same process, same benefits that are available for other types of projects as well. The project itself, located at 3 Lexington, and I'm going to say 3 Lexington, although the overall project does encompass 4 parcels, 9, 11, and 15 Lexington, which would be used to construct surface parking and other site improvements to support the development. The development is a 4-story building to be condominiumized, and the application relates only to floors 2, 3, and 4. The applicant, Full of Green Gold LLC, is affiliated with Construction Simplified, a local employee-owned company that provides construction management, owner's representative, and development partner services. You're likely familiar with them. About 5 years ago, they bought 859 West Fulton, about 4 blocks west, renovated that, and they have since outgrown that space. So they would occupy the top 2 floors of this building and seek a tenant for the second floor office with grand goals of moving into that space as they continue to grow over time as well. They do plan to hire about 10 additional employees over the next couple years as they continue to grow, average wages of about $36 an hour. The inclusion plan that's been submitted identifies 33.8% overall participation, which is a very aggressive goal. That's just over $1 million of the $3 million construction project. The overall project did need special land use approval for the parking on the northernmost parcel, which is zoned residential. That was obtained at the last Planning Commission meeting, and both the West Fulton Business Association and the John Ball Area Neighbors had an opportunity to submit their letters for that special land use request. I will leave it there, and I will invite Brent Gibson. Mr. Gibson is the founder of Construction Simplified, up to tell you a little bit more about what he plans at the site.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hear me all right?
Yeah.
Brent Gibson, President, Founder of Construction Simplified. Appreciate the time here to hear our request. It's been a long journey of my personal involvement in this parcel. An investment in West Fulton, as Jono said, purchased something 5 years ago, 6 years ago, renovated it, moved in, built a team starting with myself, and now we're up to 10. We are looking to expand, and what our current facility doesn't provide is space. Because we're also builders and developers, we also like to create our own space that's unique to us. So what you'll see here is our 4-story building, plans for currently to take top 2 floors, lease out 2 in the short term, and as we continue to grow, not only locally but nationally, we would keep this as our what we call our corporate headquarters for the country. So really excited. It's been, like I said, 3 years ago I first met the people procuring the property, wanted to bring something appropriate to West Fulton given its use, and I think we have attained that. So it's also important to note I own the 4 parcels directly west of this. Our intention is if the economy stays strong and our business stays strong, we would be building multifamily mixed use on the west side. So this isn't a one-off project. This is our investment into West Fulton. We wish more people would see what we see there, and hopefully this starts at Snowball. Any questions?
Great, thank you. I'll turn to my colleague from the First Ward, who's probably a little bit more engaged in this effort than we are. So do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I don't know if I have too many questions, although, you know, this parcel's been vacant since I moved into the neighborhood, and so I'm thrilled to see something coming forward on it. Really appreciate the way that Construction Simplified moved in on West Fulton, got involved. We can talk later about your old space, because I think it's great, and have some ideas about who might like it. But I just really want to just thank you for your aggressive commitment to MLB. Like that's something that is pleasant to see in the mix here. Glad to hear that you got the special land use approval for the parking, and I think it's a great project.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Commissioner, any questions or comments? No, I just echo what Commissioner Repart said, and glad to see this space potentially transform. And I think it's ideal now with the Laker line up and running and fully operationalized. I think this entire corridor is ripe for redevelopment. So thanks for being one of the
We're excited.
Early visionaries in that space. Yeah.
We often say don't let the cat out of the bag, but at some point it would help
Yeah.
move it along. So
Yeah.
West Fulton's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's even right now, it's fun to see there's stuff being built on West Fulton, so it is going to change, and this is kind of the entrance point to driving west.
Great, thanks. Thank you for being here. So John, can you remind us process-wise, what are we looking at for timeline and what are the next steps?
Yeah, so with this project, it is located in the West Side Corridor Improvement Authority's development area, so our next stop will be to them. And that'll be early in March, and then we will come back to you to go through that process that I described that you're familiar with, scheduling public hearings on creation of a district in March through April.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, that will take us to our next item, and this is a request to establish a neighborhood enterprise zone and consider a revised brownfield plan amendment for the Studio Park Phase 2 residential tower. We'll start again with Mr. Klooster.
Yeah, so this is obviously an exciting project for us to be working on with the developer. 2 applications, as noted, have been filed related to the second phase of the Studio Park overall development. Phase 1, which I know you're all very familiar with, but just I happened to look on Google Earth this morning and they haven't caught up. It still shows our parking lots. And the old road that used to be there. So that was, this phase 1 of the project was approved in late 2017. So if you can imagine, that's not that long ago. And phase 1, I'll call it phase 1, The theater, 106 residential apartments, retail, hotel, acrisure, public piazza, multi-story parking ramp, $130 million of investment and over 600 jobs on that, what used to be publicly owned parking, surface parking. As you may recall, this phase 2 was contemplated as a component of, a future phase of the development all along, but the timing was uncertain. And the idea was that it would come as a separate application after phase 1 was up and running. And so much to our delight, very quickly, the developer has come forward with this phase 2 plan. The phase 2 plan is about $52 million of additional investment, 16 stories on top of the parking ramp. The first 11 stories would be comprised of 165 apartment units, studios, 1 and 2 bedrooms, and then the top 5 floors would be 24 condominium units. And there is a floor of amenity uses in there as well. The proposed rents are shown in the memo. They range from just below 120% of AMI to over 150% of AMI for this downtown location, and reflecting on the housing needs and opportunities report that you received a year ago or so. There is a demand for these units in the marketplace, a demand of 2,500 units within this price range over the next 5 years. And there's an expected growth in households of about 2,700 households that need housing in this price, that will have incomes in this price range over the next 5 years as well. So definitely a demand for this in the marketplace, which is why the developer is here. The inclusion plan for this project details $1.8 million of commitments to the overall project, 1.2 for minority-owned businesses, $600,000 for women-owned, and $100,000 from micro-local, so there's some overlap in there as well. So the two applications, somewhat unique. So the neighborhood enterprise zone tax exemption would apply to the apartment units and not the condominiums, so it would be limited to the first 11 floors and just the apartment units. And in your memo, it'll say it's a 9-year tax exemption under the neighborhood enterprise zone. We continue to work with the developer and understand the investments that they're making in sort of mobility infrastructure, including electric vehicle infrastructure, and that may increase that term by the time we come to you to schedule a public hearing. The brownfield plan amendment, so you recall there is a brownfield plan amendment related to the overall project. That was approved, like I said, in 2017. That brownfield plan amendment specifically excluded phase 2 from the plan amendment. With the unknown timeline and unknown certainty of that phase of the project, it was left out at that time intentionally. So the amendment that has been filed, the revised amendment for the brownfield plan that's been filed here, does not add any additional costs for reimbursement. Those have all been incurred, as you would imagine, in phase 1 of the development. What this does is adds the condominium unit, the air rights above the parking ramp, as eligible property so that the taxes from that portion of the development can be used to reimburse the eligible costs. There are eligible costs being reimbursed to both the developer, about lost my page, just under $23 million being reimbursed to the developer, and about $2.8 million being reimbursed to the city for the construction of the new Ottawa Avenue that was relocated to facilitate the development. So this amendment to the brownfield plan, all it does is expedite the reimbursement to both the developer and to the city because of this additional component of the development. It does not add any additional costs. The project is on the DDA's agenda for tomorrow for consideration of their support related to the modifications that are needed to the parking ramp to facilitate this development, sprinkling the parking ramp, as well as some ADA type investments. And then this project would come to the Brownfield Authority at the end of the month before coming back to you on the same schedule as the previous project in March. So I do have JD Lokes here from the development team, and I'll ask him to come up and say a few words as well.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Mr. J.D. Lokes.
Good afternoon.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure to see you
afternoon.
all in person again after the last couple of years. Alan Bolio, who spoke to the Economics Club yesterday, told us all to borrow as much money as possible and put it into residential real estate, so that's why we're here. Just overview on Studio Park. I think most of you have looked extensively at this project over the years. This has always been part of the plan to bring a residential tower here. Studio Park as a whole has done exceeded almost all of our expectations aside from the impact that the pandemic has had. The theater came right out of the gate relative to other theaters, doing better than we expected. A listening room was really getting up to speed, became my favorite, maybe your favorite room in the community as well, to listen to live performance. And the apartments are on a waiting list now. They're 100% occupied. We were able to, just in time before the pandemic hit, bring Acrisure downtown, so they are leasing our office building for us on a long-term lease, which will bring a nice steady influence. The hotel, which we do not manage ourselves, they opened at the worst time possible perhaps, but as we understand it, they are really ramping up and doing quite well as well. So we're eager to bring this next phase to Studio Park and really appreciate your support in it.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to see. And so, commissioners, you probably remember this. I know we had lengthy conversations around the DDA table when this was approved, that there was always this vision and intent to have a second tower. And it's just been incredible, despite the pandemic, to see what we believe and what I still believe to be a transformational project that has led a lot of the energy throughout that southeast side, so South Arena side. Commissioners, any questions about this item before us? Commissioner Jones?
I just want to say I too am excited about the potential of additional housing units in the city. And I think that I'm just, I think, elated that, things have come together as they have, because again, you all were in the midst of this right before the floor kind of bottomed out. And so kudos to you and the commitment and the carrying out the vision of following through and getting this in place. And I think that again, we're in everything that we read, everything that we hear, we're just constantly reminded of the need for additional housing units across the board. So just want to say thank you for doing your part.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. And I personally I don't recall if this was part of the conversation a couple of years ago, but I'm glad to see that condo units are also included. I don't know, colleagues, if you hear this, but I hear from folks who
Right.
want to buy a condo downtown. And again, we just don't have many options for individuals, especially over in the South Arena area.
Yeah, we expect this will bring, as drawn, I think 28 condo units in addition to the 165 apartments.
Yeah, that's great to have the ownership and the rental.
Right, both.
Yeah. Commissioner Repard, any questions?
I don't have any questions. I just I was remarking to Jeremiah that I was not, for some reason it kind of left my mind that there was a phase two. So I'm excited to see a phase two, and I think that it was great planning to build a lot that could be built on top of later. And so the reach that you described of this project in just a few short years is pretty incredible. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. All right, with that, I'll see you probably again tomorrow morning at the DDA. So thanks for coming down to City Hall today. Appreciate it. All right, John, so this will be back before us next month?
Yes, after the Brownfield Authority meeting at the end of the month, it'll come to you March 15th.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, that will take us to our next item, and that is an application for a 12-year industrial facilities exemption certificate for Action Tooling LLC, and this is over at 3100 Ken O'Shea Industrial Park Court Southeast.
Yeah, so this is the third project here today, and I know you had on your agenda previously a grant application to build some sidewalks over here, so second time you're seeing this property today. The application, as noted, that has been filed is for a 12-year industrial facilities tax exemption certificate for a new construction project on this vacant lot here. Action Tooling LLC is technically a new company. Action Mold and Machining is a company that you may be familiar with and located just to the south there on Kenosha Industrial Park Drive. Action Mold and Machining was a veteran-owned, locally owned, veteran-owned company that does additive manufacturing and also sort of on-demand servicing for the tooling industry. So it has a lot of customers in the manufacturing world around West Michigan. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's fascinating. Cybridge Technologies is a company that was established in 2019 and is deploying capital, essentially acquiring companies across the country in the mobility, life sciences, and technology and services industries. Cybridge identified Action Mold and Machining as a valuable strategic acquisition for their portfolio based on the services, the high quality of services that are offered by Action Mold and Machine, as well as the access to the West Michigan marketplace. So the new company, Action Tooling LLC, is the one that was created upon Cybridge's acquisition of Action Mold and Machine. The project before you today is the construction of approximately 15,400 square foot facility on this property, the vacant lot at 3100 Kenosha Industrial Park Court. The overall cost of that is about $2.6 million. There's another $2 million of equipment that needs to go into that facility. Working with the general contractor, there is a commitment to $186,000 of that going to women, minority-owned, or micro-local subcontractors. The former Action Mold and Machine employs 25, continues to employ 25 individuals, and they will need to add about 15 jobs to operate this new facility. And I have Mike Fassbender here, who was the owner of Action Mold and Machine and owns the real estate here and is still with Action Tooling. So I'm going to invite Mike up, and he can tell you the impetus for this project and what additional capabilities it will give them at Action Tooling.
Great, thank you. Hello and welcome.
Hello, Mayor.
Good to have you.
Good afternoon. Thank you. As Jono said, I've been in that park since I got out of the military, so it'll be coming up on 30 years.
Wow.
I think George Bush's dad was president when I was in. Time really goes. Dick Cheney was Secretary of Defense. But be that as it may,
days.
yeah. That quick.
I know.
But like Jono said, we were acquired by Cybridge Technologies and renamed Action Tooling. And what the goal here is, they build big molds, and some of the tooling is larger than we're able to handle. So we're going to put this addition on, and then we're going to put a larger crane system in and some bigger equipment to handle it. And the main customers that we're going to be supporting right now would be Lax, ADAC Automotive, Cascade Engineering, Ventra, which is part of Flexingate, Royal Technologies, possibly Shape Corp. And a lot of the tooling that these folks run is just big. So we're going to have to get set up to manage that.
Great. This is a great little space, the industrial park over there.
Yeah, we've been there quite a while. My brother and I started our business in the 90s, and we liked it. We like that area. We're committed to it. And I had the lot that I bought from the city many years ago behind our building, the 3100. So it just worked out that we had the property that would suffice our goal to add on now that we are where we are.
Yeah, yeah,
So I live downtown too, so I've been in the Sea Grand Rapids for a long time.
that's great. Thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
Congratulations on your growth. That's a great story to tell for our city.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any questions. I appreciate you being here, and also thank you for your service.
Here, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this one will come to you more quickly. It'll be on your next City Commission agenda on the 22nd to schedule public hearings on this project.
Great. It's good to see these projects come forward. All right, Commissioners, next that's going to take us to a mobile GR pilot project update. I actually am really glad to see this before us. I was having a conversation with our city manager a few weeks back and said it'd be really nice to get an update on all of our efforts, and we thought it best that it come in front of this body. Obviously, we know that the work being done by Mobile GR is intricately connected to economic development in our community. And so we appreciate having Mr. Naramore here today, who's leading the charge over there at Mobile GR, to give us this update today.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager, Deputy City Manager. I really appreciate the time to come and give you an update. We don't often get to come and talk about, but Jeremiah, or Mr. Gracia, and I have been working to reinvigorate sort of the partnership between when we implemented in January of 2020, when we presented on the Equitable Economic Development and Mobility Strategic Plan. This afternoon, I have a very brief presentation to highlight some of the pilot projects, talk about some proposed work that we will be having more conversations during the budget development, and then also want to give you some verbal updates on some other project work that is innovation but isn't specifically called out like in this presentation. So just a quick overview of the presentation. Kind of want to give you some context of the pilots that we've undertaken and what the status of them is, going through the past and ongoing projects. Just highlight some of the benefits and challenges and how they're informing our work moving forward, and then really kind of just highlighting the frame of reference for some of our future work. So this is a really important piece that we just want to highlight for everybody. Largely through most of our lifetimes, there really was not a whole lot of innovation. It was really mostly in the automotive sector, and it was just as it related to the car. Most of everything that we're talking about has happened within the last 10 years. And there is even more that has happened in the last few years as a relate of responding to the pandemic. And this is just something that dockless bike share and dockless scooters have only been around for about 5 years. And a lot has changed in the nature of when we did our bike share feasibility plan. So we just always like to put together this graphic just to show how much has happened in such a short amount of time and how we're trying to react to that. And that's really informative from a public sector perspective. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that a lot of this work started back in 2015 with GR Forward and trying to have the component of creating our department and establishing it to be more innovative as it relates to mobility. And then that it was translated when City Manager Washington started in one of the key strategic priorities from the city strategic plan, which is right there underneath mobility, which is to be innovative, efficient, and equitable with all of our mobility solutions. But then there's also a snapshot, which is the vision for our department and how we are translating the work of the city strategic plan into our operational work on a daily basis. So the first pilot project that I wanted to just kind of show some of the results of what we've been working on is the Ford City of Tomorrow Challenge, which is known as the City One. For those of you who don't remember, that was a partnership with Ford, and that started in late 2018. So one thing that we've done for these pilot projects at the very bottom of all these slides is to talk about one of the challenges that we have from when we first start talking about them to when we actually put them into action and get some feedback as it relates to this. This project was a really great learning experience. It was probably one of the first big public-private partnerships that we undertook as a department and as a city in trying to lead first with some of our values. And after a lot of the work with the Ford team and doing community involvement, we advanced a project to improve paratransit services for those in our community who don't have access to a vehicle or who rely more heavily on what's known by the Rapid as the Go Bus. That partnership was with the Rapid, the city, the Disability Advocates of Kent County, Kaizen Health, which is a company that is based in Chicago and works primarily with healthcare facilities, and then also with Ford. We learned a lot during this project. I would say that one of the biggest things is that when you're working with partners, although you have the buy-in from everybody within the organization, sometimes that buy-in doesn't translate to some of the vendor relationships you have. So one of the biggest hurdles we had is for a pilot project in a short amount of time was actually working with a vendor that the Rapid has with helping with calling and scheduling with the system. So that ended up actually forcing us to kind of reconfigure the pilot project. That was the first hurdle. Then the second hurdle is after we kind of had a really good scope for the project, we were scheduled to launch in February of 2020. And that launch did not take place for various reasons. And we were able to launch a truncated pilot in July of 2020. But again, the participation was a little bit lower than we had hoped for, and I think a lot of that had to do with people were still trying to figure out how to navigate the pandemic and accessing different services. But we were able to complete the pilot at the end of 2020, and then there was an evaluation in 2021 that we've been using to inform a lot of our work moving forward. The second one is AVGR, which is our partnership with MicroMobility, which is an autonomous vehicle company out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. This is actually one that we're very proud of in terms of the amount of local corporate partnerships that we had, which all of their logos are listed up there. And so this is actually, we're in phase 2 of this project right now. Phase 1 was the shuttles that mirrored on the Dash West route. Phase 2 right now are actually auto-grade Lexus vehicles that you'll see navigating, and that's an on-demand responsive system. This project was really another learning experience, mostly because we're trying to still understand the costs of delivering these types of services. In the first iteration, the city put in $250,000 into supporting getting the project. The private sector leveraged that with $400,000 in investment. In phase 2 of the project, the city has invested about $50,000, and the private sector has invested about $250,000. And in phase 3, the plan is to continue the service with no investment there will be continued corporate investment, but not an investment that we're proposing from the city's side. Again, this is one in which you'll see the timeline. We first started having the conversations about the time that we were doing the Ford City of Tomorrow Challenge. Service did launch in 2019, but it was also impacted as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Service was able to resume, and it continues to this day in a different iteration.
Josh, do you want us to, can we ask questions while you present?
We'll do it, City Manager, we'll just do it at the end.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll hold my question.
Just moving on to the next project is the MicroMobility project, in which we took a different approach to engage private sector partners and to open it up, and for the city to partner with each private entity, but for the city to take a more proactive nature in managing the public right-of-way. We launched first in spring of 2020. We selected a vendor. We launched in fall of 2020 with Spin, and then we added Lime, a second vendor. And we're currently evaluating the program and plan to bring forward an overall summary of where we are as it relates. But almost 500,000 rides have been conducted over the course of the pilot, which we think it could even have been more popular had we not been dealing with some of the pandemic-related issues. But that's one in which we're very happy about that, and in particular for the next slide, which was a component of this. This was our first opportunity to test something to reduce the costs as participating in this. So with Spin, the city partnered with them to launch a community pass program. So we worked collaboratively with many of our nonprofit organizations here in West Michigan. In particular, I can't say enough great things about the partnership with Kareem Scales at the NAACP. It's a partner that we had never worked with before on mobility-related issues, and they're actually one of our biggest partners moving forward and helping inform a lot of our future pilot efforts. But what we did is we were able to get almost 600 participants, and they received 5 free 30-minute rides per day for a 3-month period. And some of the feedback we received was, especially the timing of when this took place during the pandemic, was this afforded people recreation. It wasn't just for work. And it was a very successful project, and that we hope to continue this same type of project moving forward as we go through in selecting a vendor for more permanent services here. This is just a table that summarizes a lot of what we've learned and iterated in through the mobility projects. I think the biggest challenge that we've kind of gone through is the amount of time and resources, and also the staffing capacity, and that's not just on the public sector. Many of these private sector companies have not really regularly worked with the public sector, and so it's building capacity on their side as well as on our side. But I think one thing that we're really saying is that learning is one of the most important things that we've been able to do as a result of a lot of these pilot projects. So just pivoting to the future, we're really kind of focusing and framing our efforts in mobility innovation in 3 areas. The first and one of the most important ones is what we're going to be doing related to safety. How can we reduce fatal and serious injury crashes in our community? The second is around mobility access, and then the third is all related to electrification. So for safety, it's really in 4 areas. What can we be learning and doing as it relates to operations and engineering? There's a lot of conversation about how to improve pedestrian crossings. We've been really successful in kind of implementing some of the best solutions here in our community, but we're continuing to learn and iterate and try to bring even more of those solutions and testing different types of engineering solutions. The second is related to how we can engage our partners. With some of our efforts, we've started to invest in some targeted social media advertising, and we're hoping to do more of those test cases in order to better educate the public on some of the safety pieces. As it relates to enforcement, that's one in which we continue to work very proactively with our partners at GRPD and really understanding what role that plays and how that works into some of our community efforts and how technology can influence that. And then the last as it relates to is evaluation. We've invested in a lot of mapping tools and visualization to better understand where in our community some of our biggest safety challenges are. As it relates to mobility access, 3 real big areas here is first, as it relates to transit connections. We continue to build our partnership with the Rapid. We're very excited that they're about ready to embark on a transit master plan, which is a very long-term vision for what transit could be for the region in the years to come. And as part of that, you'll be hearing a lot more about us as we need to continue to evaluate and iterate what the future of our DASH system is. As development continues to happen on the Near West Side, and also as it relates to the pandemic and travel behavior, what system do we need in place to serve downtown and some of our neighborhood commercial districts, and what role does that play as it relates to our relationship with the Rapid? The second is the MicroMobility pilot project. How do we take that from a pilot project to a regular fixed asset within the community and expanding it? And then the last is just with how we're integrating our modes. And this is as it relates to exploring what's called a mobility wallet, is just trying to be able to figure out ways in which we can reduce the costs for and the barriers for all different services, whether it's transit, micromobility, or just other services that we don't yet have in the community. Last area is electrification. There's a lot that is going to be happening in this area. The infrastructure bill that just passed at the federal level has a tremendous amount, as well as a lot of work that's being done by our utility partners in the state of Michigan and a number of state agencies as well as local agencies. The first is we are still continuing and we're revisiting our conversations with electric vehicle car share providers. This is an exciting thing that really was put on the back burner during the pandemic, but there is a lot more excitement happening nationally, and particularly working with small and medium-sized cities and bringing that. Second is just in general with ways in which we can deploy and test out different types of EV or electric vehicle infrastructure. And the last point is not just for cars. It's also for e-bikes, for scooters. You know, it could also be for other types of services that we at the city are entertaining and making sure we have the ability to charge for all of that infrastructure. And then also this is one in which we're trying to do a lot more interdepartmental coordination, particularly with our Office of Sustainability. So that was a lot in a very short amount of time, and we can take any questions on this specific slideshow.
All right. Thank you. City Manager, did you want to add anything?
I'll defer to you, Mayor. I do have some comments, but I'll wait till your remarks.
Okay. So Josh, I have a couple of questions. One, I'm curious about the data on the utilization of the May Mobility. Have we seen pretty consistent ridership? I mean, I remember the day that we launched it, and obviously with COVID, there was a significant impact on ridership. And then we made the change from kind of the shuttles to the
On-demand.
more SUV type of vehicles. So I'm curious to know a little bit more. Did that change increase ridership? Do we think that it's sustainable with current ridership?
So Mr. Kimura is handing me the ridership pieces, so I appreciate that piece. So the ridership has actually dropped significantly since they've gone to the on-demand, and we can share that as part of that. But I believe we're down to just, let's see, in December of 2021, it was 289 riders for the month.
Yeah.
and they only operate 5 days out of the week. That's something that we've been working a lot with them, because as they went to the on-demand versus the fixed route system, there has not been a lot of education and awareness, and we had been pointing them and working with the Ward 1 commissioners and doing some outreach with the business district and the neighborhood associations about how to connect and use the service. Probably one of the biggest users of it is Mr. Gracia, who has talked quite a bit about his use of it and going to meetings and talking about it with some of our downtown business partners. But that is something that we continue to work with them on, because we noticed that when they left the fixed route to the on-demand, they're struggling with that. And there's also a little bit of the movement to the auto grade platform. It's not an accessible vehicle. They're still working on that, which they have plans, I believe, to roll out a minivan, a Toyota Sienna minivan in the next year. But that is something that they've been struggling with in West Michigan. And they also launched an on-demand pilot in Ann Arbor. And they have been a little slow in getting that launched as well.
Well, that affirms what I've experienced anecdotally. I used to take it when it was fixed route, and I liked the shuttle that we had. I wasn't sure what the impetus was for moving to an SUV. And I know it's a pilot, so they're probably trying out a number of different things to see what works. So, good to know.
Yes.
Good to know. I have two other questions, and I'll turn to my colleagues. So for the bikes and the scooters, I'm glad to see the utilization and the demand. I know probably most of us, and you have as well, heard some complaints about them ending up in locations throughout the city that are not ideal. I know I've seen the folks who are out and about picking them up and putting them back and charging them. I'm curious about operationally, if we continue to have struggles, or have we started to figure out some of those challenges and build in some solutions to try to be a little bit more preventative?
So that's actually one of the evaluation mechanisms that we are working through with both the vendors in terms of how we've dealt with them when we've received complaints via 311, whether they come directly to Mobile GR, and how we're working with businesses and neighbors and residents. That's one of the evaluation mechanisms. That's also one of the pieces that we're talking about them as we move forward to a longer-term partnership arrangement, improving the service delivery. And that's part of the ongoing conversations that we're going to have with both vendors. But one of the biggest ones is, how can we work on a longer-term solution to make it easier for people to understand how to register a complaint if they do see a vehicle that's immobilized, and how we can do that. There's also something that had just been sent to us by the state of Michigan, which is a mapping software that helps when there are issues as it relates to the GPS sensors. One of the biggest things we've learned is the GPS sensors are not the most accurate. As a former Coast Guard person, Justin or Mr. Kimura and I were talking a lot about how it's within like 25 feet when you would hope it would be at a much better of resolution. But the biggest piece is when we go to a longer-term arrangement, they'll have higher levels of equipment and the newer generations of equipment with the scooters and the bikes that do have better ways in which they can locate them and get them back into service.
But despite some of those challenges, we anticipate maintaining a dockless system, or are we also looking at potential benefit of a docking system?
We're hoping to make an investment into more fixed docking systems, and that's part of the conversation with like charging system. You may recall that when you all had approved the transit advertising policy, one of the areas we talked about specifically when there were future docking stations for bikes and scooters. But we plan to take the designated parking zones and invest a little bit more in the parking elements associated with them after it transitions from a pilot to a more fixed resource within the community. A big piece of that is a lot of complaints are within neighborhoods where we don't have centralized parking locations, and how can we work with residents and neighborhood associations about where those should be and how we would go about doing that. There's also things that the vendors have been testing about trying to offer financial incentives within the tools for people to not park them in the middle of a neighborhood in front of their house, and maybe drop it off 2 blocks away in a designated parking zone and then just walk the extra 2 blocks.
Yeah, good. That's good
Mayor,
to know.
can I
Yeah, go
add
ahead.
to the response? I would be interested in the evaluation, how we compare to other communities with the compliance of our ordinance in terms of the utilization of those micro-mobility assets. And not that you have to do it now. I mean, if you have it, that's fine. But my experience, at least since we were more late adopters in technology, we are not having the same level of non-compliance that other communities had that were early adopters, where they're leaving them right in the middle of the street, the right of way, causing major incidents. And so I think as we look at the report on our experience, I think we should not only look at our experience in Grand Rapids, but how that compares to other communities. Now, if Mr. Kamira has that information, please share.
Yes, sir. So one difference at Grand Rapids is we've taken it a level further over some communities where we've actually got these designated parking zones. So the majority of the complaints or scooters that we find technically outside of a zone are actually parked correctly in another city. You know, in other cities just require them to stay off the street, away from a pedestrian ramp, away from a building entrance, away from a transit stop, but not centralized. We put that in our pilot to try and make a little bit better effort at having the city be a little neater. I will say that over the past couple of months, the complaints have been down, but I don't know yet is whether that's winter related because there's less vehicles out, or if people are getting better, or if people are becoming more accepting of them, or a combination of all three, but that's something we're looking to dig into. Like Josh mentioned, as we move out of the pilot, we're looking to make the parking infrastructure a little bit more permanent, either through charging stations. Some cities in the industry are moving to a lock-to model where you actually have to take the cable that's on the vehicle and lock it around the bike rack in order to properly end your ride. So I think the bottom line is the industry is moving pretty quickly, and I think we're still, at the forefront of that, especially with the parking zones. And I think we'll continue to pursue that as an option. That's a good method for keeping it a little bit neater.
And Mayor, I think from a utilization, at some point we're going to have to make a business decision around continued investment or subsidy. The Dash ridership is significantly lower than it was before and not rebounding as fast. I think at least a quarter of what the ridership was, more significantly less. The utilization of these assets MicroMobility are increasing, and we're not subsidizing them as much. And so at some point we should begin evaluating, our transit policy on what type of public transit we want to subsidize, and maybe investing more in some of these micromobility assets.
Great, thanks. All right, any additional questions or comments?
I just had one question. So you for the MicroMobility project, autonomous vehicles, you mentioned that essentially it's going to be non-subsidized when we move from pilot to real. Do you have a sense of what that's going to look like for the micromobility?
Not at this time. We're actually trying to have some meetings with the companies to start talking about what the framework is for moving out of a pilot into a more permanent piece of that. Okay. I will say that this is something that we're trying to iterate and learn from other communities. We've recently started having conversations with Columbus, Ohio, that they've been in a pilot for about 3 years. Okay. And we've started to talk about lessons learned from both of them. And they actually have 3 vendors there instead of the 2 that we have here. And so.
And I would imagine that there's some overlap too between the Go Bus conversation and the on-demand MicroMobility. So I'm not surprised that people haven't picked it up as much because you have to get the word out about how to get it to your house. But maybe there's a way to link those two together, because it really is the same service, only it's a different set of criteria for who could use it.
Yeah, thanks. All right.
I love all of it.
Thank you.
I can't believe that there's been that many rides. That's incredible.
Yeah. I really appreciate this update. It's very helpful. Commissioner Jones?
Yep. Thanks so much for the presentation, Josh. I had some initial conversations with Josh, Madam Mayor, and Mr. City Manager, as a member of the Mobile GR Commission, in particular around safety, and would like to perhaps have more substantive conversations about a very intentional effort around traffic calming throughout the entire city. And this came about, I think, for me personally, because of the number of calls that I get as a commissioner of just, the very basic complaint of folks having an issue with folks speeding down their streets, whether it's a side street or even a main thoroughfare. And like to see if we could have, again, something, and I know that this is not a call for, for roundabouts throughout the entire city. I know that some people feel a certain
Thank
way
you.
about them. I love them. I think they're neat. I just think that we need to have directions for some folk to explain how to use them. It amazes me, but I think that perhaps, again, more substantive conversations around the possibility of really pushing the idea of slowing down would be a really, really good thing. And so I've, again, had conversations with Josh. We'd like to follow that up, perhaps with all of us, the four of us.
Yeah, thanks. All right, thank you for that.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
I had one other thing, if I could, just
Sure.
to bring up something that's not directly related to our mobility innovation, but just wanted to highlight some of the work that we've been doing around social zones. And you may have seen there was a little bit of media attention towards it this weekend with an update that we gave to the Mobile GR Commission last week. And just in general, we've been working with DGRI and a number of other city departments and saying the success of that program has been tremendous. And that was a way in which we piloted something that we'd not done before. But we want to actually try to make that a more permanent fixture within our community. So we started to talk about what that could be. We've worked very closely with those partners, and it's centered around how can we make them, build them into an existing process. The Parklet program has existed for a long time, but not a lot of adoption a result because of how expensive it was and some of the challenges associated with it. So how can we be more mindful of that? Biggest complaint we've had with social zones and working with a member of our Mobile GR Commission and the Disability Advocates of Kent County is the ADA accessibility of them and how can we improve that. Updating the Parklet manual for winter operations so that we can make sure the fixtures are year-round. But then as it relates is establishing an appropriate fee structure that doesn't negatively impact a business, but does allow us to recover some of the costs. What does that look like? And really reducing the cost of a program compared to what it was under the existing Parklet manual. And really, I think the biggest piece of this is just understanding that we don't plan to charge any businesses for this entire season this summer. We're going to be iterating and trying to get as much feedback and working with the Chamber of Commerce, Mr. App, and Josh Lunger is also part of our Mobile GR Commission. So we had a really good conversation around that. It's very early on, and I just wanted to be able to share some of that and for the city manager to weigh in as well.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, and I was glad to hear that it's conversations right now, but we have a lot of work to be done before we make a permanent, or at least a more longer-term decision. Yeah. Anything else, City Manager?
Yeah, Mayor, I just want to reiterate what you said and thank Mobile GR, but also the collaboration with Economic Development, our planning department, for all the things that they have done to be creative and supportive during recovery in the pandemic. And you'll hear during the budget process, some of this has come unsubsidized. And so we'll have to address those as part of our budget discussions. But I really appreciate the intentionality about making sure that mobility is complementary to economic development.
Yeah, thank you, City Manager. Thank you. Commissioners, I would like to make a little bit of a change to our agenda because I just realized Mr. Ali Howie is in the audience and I see he's under verbal updates. But due to time, I want to make sure that we are able to have an opportunity to welcome him and hear from him in case he has something that he was expected to go to at 1:30. So, City Manager, did you want to introduce Ali or? Do you want to just come on up? I don't know if you've met everyone up here, but welcome to our chambers. If you don't know, Ali Howie is the new Executive Director of the New Community Transformation Fund. I know that he spoke at the MLK breakfast, so some of us may have heard him there. But we are really delighted to have you at our Economic Development Project team so that everyone has a chance to meet you in person. I know I've had a chance to do that as well as City Manager. So for those who haven't met you, do you want to share a little bit about your new role and
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you so much, Mayor Bliss, commissioners, managers. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. We're excited about the new Community Transformation Fund. It was spearheaded by some great citizens of Grand Rapids. Birgit, who is the former chair of the Right Place and now is the chair of our board. Scott Welsh, who has spent many years in the community as well, founded this years ago and hired me to continue the efforts. We reached 10 million in funding for this fund, all from West Michigan businesses that are really putting their checkbook where their mouths are as far as diversity goes and investing in diverse communities. So we're really excited about having the community support to do our investing. And essentially, we want to invest in the very best companies in West Michigan that happen to be diverse, like this dais, comprised of diverse individuals that are doing technology that is innovative and that is going to help not only our community, but other communities and continue to employ folks in West Michigan. So we're really excited about it. We're closing in on our first investment, actually made it and going to announce very soon. We're excited about that and all the work that company is doing to innovate in the healthcare sector. And so we'll continue to look for companies that have great social impact as well as investment impact. And this is the first venture capital fund of its kind. It's in Grand Rapids. And you all have already been so supportive, and we appreciate your continued support as we really prove this model that it's scalable and profitable to invest in minority-led companies, and that we can do that right here in Grand Rapids and make sure that the jobs and the wealth that gets created then becomes a part of the community. And so we have a portion of the fund that will be early stage, that will invest in after seed, around the Series A round of companies that are in the technology sectors. And then we have a portion of the fund that's going to work with legacy businesses. So businesses that may have been sold to folks out of town will now have the opportunity to stay within Grand Rapids and even have a more diverse C-suite, a more diverse organization. So we're really excited about it. Mayor, as you know, we're already collaborating with other cities across the nation to do a similar model. We're the first. Denver, Colorado will be the second affiliate under our model. Their city has already committed, I believe, $2 million to that fund. Again, seeing the benefits from a society standpoint as well as the investment upside. And so we're really excited about continuing to make investments, initial check sizes from $250,000 to $500,000 in businesses, expecting a return, underwriting to a 3x net return for our investors. And we hope to continue to do so, investing in around 15 to 20 companies in this first fund over these next 2 years.
Such exciting work, and I always love when other mayors and cities look to Grand Rapids as the leader and want to replicate what we do, so I'm really delighted to hear that. And I'm super excited to hear that we're close to announcing the first deal, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, let me see if my colleagues have any questions. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Mr. Howie?
Just wanted to take the opportunity to welcome you. And again, had the opportunity to hear you at the MLK Breakfast for the Urban League, and would look to avail myself to help in any way that I possibly can personally. But I'm excited about your presence here and have been excited about the fund since they launched it some time ago. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to have you to our Corridor Improvement Authority or somebody from your group. I think that they would have a lot of questions about how to apply and a little bit more about the fund.
Definitely. Love that.
Mayor?
City Manager?
Yes, I too want to welcome Mr. Harley to our community and certainly appreciate Ms. Close and her leadership and all the other partners in making sure that the fund happens. But Mr. Harley is a very humble man
Yes,
in his
he is.
introduction. We are very fortunate to have someone of his caliber and talents. He is a Harvard graduate who has majored in economics. He has worked with other venture capitalist funds before, and he has worked across the country. And so we are very fortunate to have someone of his background work with our community, and looking forward to working with him and helping move the needle economically for people of color. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
Thank you. All right, and Commissioners, final thing, we'll have Mr. Overman come on up and talk to us about the activity report from the Development Center.
Well, thank you again for this opportunity to present on our activity over at the Development Center for the last month. January has started out in kind of the same step that we did 2021, and so we had a record month with $37 million in construction value throughout the month that was approved through our department. Including in that is 13 new housing units that are being constructed or approved for construction right now. A few projects that I wanted to bring to your attention. The Blackmire Pump Manufacturing Facility is expanding their property or their facilities on Century with a $7 million expansion project there. The Meyer Hart Center is renovating some of its clerical and conference space to add 24 new ICU beds to their facility there as well. And then also just to kind of highlight the Viridian Place Phase 3 is going before Planning Commission for their site review as well. So that is the final phase of that project and should be proceeding through with that. And last, we have a couple of text amendments that are being proposed for some lot size amendments, and I'm going to invite Ms. Turkleston up to kind of talk through that so you're aware of what's going on there.
Great, thank you. That was, when I read the report, that's what I circled to ask questions about.
Yes, thank you. I thought it would be worth highlighting. So the Planning Department did receive a request from a planning consultant who's representing her client, Ms. Lene Wells. I think many of you are familiar with her. A professional colleague of mine, and she has submitted a text amendment on behalf of her client. What that text amendment will do effectively is for allowing for an administrative departure, which is generally a staff level reduction of the lot width. It is tied back to the original plat, which means that it's scalable. It's relative to the context of the neighborhood that it's in. The goal of that, of course, is to allow for increased development for single-family and two-family housing. I will note that in the low-density residential, which is the vast majority of our residential areas, two-family residential is still a special land use. And so what that would mean is that the Planning Commission would then have that authority or that tool to reduce the lot width associated for that use. So I think that we could see this to be an effective way to increase density or have some infill development on what many of us might see as like side lots or larger single-family lots that you kind of look at and go, looks like there should be two houses there. But current ordinance makes it difficult for us to split that apart. So this would be a tool for that infill development to happen. Ryan Kilpatrick has been involved since the beginning with this discussion with Ms. Wells and myself, and I know that he has reached out to all of the neighborhood associations to make sure that they are aware of the text amendment that's being proposed, and I believe he has also extended the offer to attend I know that he has extended the offer to attend association meetings this month, should they choose to have him there, to help kind of convey some of that, some of the details of the nuances of the amendment themselves. And certainly planning staff would assist, but it's not our amendment. We are receiving that and processing it as we would for any text amendment. So that is scheduled for the Planning Commission on February 24th. If the Planning Commission is ready to make a decision, that would then be a recommendation to City Commission, probably through that March-April timeline.
Great. So,
Questions on that?
Kristen, I just want to make sure that I understand the issue, kind of taking it out of maybe the text amendment details. So currently, let's say in a neighborhood, my neighborhood, if there was a lot that appeared to be large enough where a home could be built, for each neighborhood in that area, you look at the average of the linear lot line, is that right? So it could be different in my neighborhood versus
Yes.
Commissioner Roberts, right? Like it's consistent with the neighborhood. And if, let's say, one or two of the lots are larger, it can skew the average, making it harder to build on a lot, which really is maybe in Commissioner Reppert's neighborhood would be a buildable lot, but my neighborhood, it's not because of how we calculate that. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
That's my current understanding.
Yep.
So this would potentially enable an administrative approval for a single family on maybe a smaller lot.
Yep.
But for a two-family, it would still go before the full planning commission.
That's correct.
But you would look at maybe other factors instead of this just kind of objective
Yeah.
average.
Yep, so what it would do is, in that two-family case, so yes, you're correct, your understanding is correct of the current ordinance. And so, right now, the way to allow for that parcel to be split is through a variance or through the Board of Zoning Appeals, which I think we know is an incredibly
Big hurdle.
challenging threshold to meet, as it should be. So this would provide us with a tool to look at a little bit of context and not be so specific with that averaging, and just say, okay, well, if we're going back to looking at the original plat and it's a legally platted lot, then maybe having infill development on that new parcel is appropriate. It may be smaller than what's happening in context, but it's still appropriate to allow for some infill development or some increased density within our neighborhood. But yes, the two-family, there's still a process, so the Planning Commission will look at whether it's appropriate, they can look at context. I think architectural design, in my opinion, would be very important, so that even if it's a smaller home than what's typically happening on that same block, it still could be entirely appropriate for that development to happen.
Okay. But both of those would go either administrative approval or planning and not have to really meet the hurdle of going through the Board of Zoning Appeals.
That's correct.
Great. I'm glad to see this. It's
Yeah, I am
likely
too.
long overdue.
I think for most of these kind of text amendments, it makes sense to wait for the master plan, but this is one that it makes perfect sense to do now. And I think that hopefully people will take advantage of it. I have a friend who's doing this exact thing, but had to go through the whole process, and they were able to do it.
Yeah.
They made it work. But I do think that this will help with that gentle infill in neighborhoods.
And we are working with Mr. Overman and his team in kind of getting some maps to try to estimate that didn't come out right. Try to estimate what the impact of this could be. It's a little bit difficult because we just don't have the capacity to dig into every block and every potential plat as it relates to vacant areas of the city. And so we will do our best to have that. But I think it is an interesting tool, and I agree with you, Commissioner Rippert. We talked a lot about this during the Housing Now process, and we really thought that this was a good master plan conversation, and it is, except I think at that time we had envisioned that timeline to be a little bit different than what we're currently seeing right now, which implementation of that master plan won't be for several years. Oops, I hit something, I'm sorry. So I think that that it will still have that engagement and that process that we'll go through. We're just doing it a little bit on a timeline. Well, we're not. We've been asked to look at this on a timeline we didn't initially anticipate.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I appreciate that. And if there are issues like this that come up, my personal opinion is I don't want, good policy changes or text amendment changes to have to wait for the master plan if we know that it is consistent with our overall vision and what we hope to happen in the future. So thank you for working on this. Commissioner Jones, any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Overman, anything else to point out on the report? Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. We are adjourned.
All right.